Some marriages begin with grand ceremonies. Some love stories spark at first sight. But others begin with a fortune teller's prophecy, a 12-year-old girl kneeling silently before an ancestral altar, and a young man who had yet to wake. So, before you settle in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy the stories we share here. Drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, turn off the lights, set the fan to a soft hum, and let yourself drift into tonight's journey. That day, the skies over Lancaster were strangely clear. Wisps of clouds thinned out, as if they too were making way for the return of someone who had been gone for far too long. The towering black gates creaked open slowly, and a silver Rolls-Royce glided down the granite-tiled driveway that led into the Lancaster estate. The soft scent of early blooming orange blossoms floated in the air as Ethan Lancaster, the sole heir of a century-old conglomerate, stepped out of the car, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked up at the house where he was born. After 5 years of studying abroad in the U.S., Ethan was home, not just as a son, but as the man fated to inherit it all. But what he didn't know was that his return would awaken a bond long buried in silence. The estate buzzed with greetings, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses at the grand welcome party organized by Miranda, his mother, to reintroduce her brilliant son to Lancaster's elite circles. But amidst the joy and celebration, a quiet figure moved unnoticed. A girl in a white blouse and pale blue skirt, her hair tied in a simple bun, her face delicate, her dark eyes as calm and distant as the night. No one paid her any mind except Ethan. His brow furrowed, and in that instant, a name surfaced in his mind, uninvited, like a whisper from someplace deep: Celeste. The girl turned around. Her eyes met his for a fleeting second. She gave a silent nod, like a greeting not meant to be spoken aloud. She was his wife, a wife he had no memory of marrying. And from that moment on, the wheels of fate began to turn again, drawing them both into a story neither could have imagined, let alone predict its ending. Ethan Lancaster was 18 that fated year, an age of burning dreams of blank pages, ready to be written with ambition and boldness. He was preparing for the most important university entrance exam of his life, and his mother Miranda often bragged to her friends, "My son. If a book touches his hands, he memorizes it page by page. He could walk right into Harvard blindfolded, but life rarely asks for permission." One rainy afternoon, Ethan was in a car accident. His head struck the window frame, no blood, no broken bones, but he fell into a coma. The estate, once quiet, became even heavier with silence. Gardeners walked softly. Housekeepers spoke in whispers. Miranda, once the sharp, commanding woman known across social circles, now sat beside her son's bed every day, unmoving, her eyes swollen red, but unable to shed a single tear. And when the doctors finally shook their heads and said, "If this continues, we're afraid his brain," Miranda turned to a place she never imagined she would, a dim altar room glowing with red lantern light, thick with incense smoke, and a man everyone called Master. The man only needed 20 minutes to say what she first thought was ridiculous. "Your son's fate has been disrupted. His birth chart clashes dangerously this year. There's only one way to balance it. He must marry someone whose chart harmonizes with his within a 10-kilometer radius. If you delay, his life will slip away." Miranda wasn't a superstitious woman, but maternal fear has a way of making even the impossible feel necessary. She nodded. 3 days later, a full data sweep across the district was carried out, and a single match was found: a 12-year-old girl named Celeste Moore, daughter of Grace the housekeeper, who worked the west wing of the Lancaster estate. Grace was stunned, but as a servant, she didn't dare refuse. Celeste, barely reaching her mother's shoulder, looked up with wide, confused eyes. She didn't understand what was happening, only whispered, "I'm going to help Mr. Ethan get better." "Right, Mama." The wedding took place in silence before the family altar. Ethan still lay unconscious in his room. Celeste knelt, hands trembling, and lit her first stick of incense for a healing marriage she couldn't comprehend. No dress, no rings, no flowers, just a quiet prayer from Miranda. "My son, wake up. Your wife is waiting." And strangely enough, Ethan woke up 3 days later. No one spoke of the marriage. No one wanted to. Miranda dismissed it as a spiritual ritual for peace of mind. Celeste returned to her place as a servant's daughter, except from that day on, she no longer shared a room with her mother. She was moved to a small room in the west wing of the estate. Their time flowed like a silent stream. No one looked at her as a young mistress, but no one forgot that Ethan's miraculous recovery began the day she arrived. Time passed in silence, as if all that had happened was no more than a strange dream, a bizarre ritual, a whispered vow under ancestral incense, and a 12-year-old girl who never truly understood what the word wife meant. After Ethan regained consciousness, he had no memory, none whatsoever, of that strange marriage. Life quickly resumed its pace. He passed his entrance exams with top scores and was soon awarded a full-ride scholarship to study abroad in the United States. His future stretched before him like a flawless map, tailored for someone born to inherit. To the outside world, Ethan Lancaster was the brilliant pride of the Lancaster family, and Celeste. She grew up like a quiet shadow in the vast halls of the estate. In the west wing, where hardly anyone came, was the room she and her mother were allowed to stay in. It was perhaps a silent reward for saving Ethan's life. No one mistreated them, but no one got close either. The other staff kept to themselves, nodding politely, then walking away. Miranda kept her distance, not cruel, not cold, but always just far enough to never acknowledge. Celeste was given access to school. Miranda allowed her to study like any other child. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe she simply wanted peace, as long as Celeste never stepped beyond her assigned role. The little girl grew up into a young woman, and the older she got, the better she learned how to walk, softly, speak gently, and exist in ways no one would notice. She was bright, obedient, reserved, always alone. The title wife was never mentioned again, and yet sometimes quietly, she wondered, was I ever truly someone's wife? Through those silent years, Celeste lived like a closed blossom. No one saw her bloom. No one knew that, behind that serene, composed exterior, was a world of unanswered questions. And then one summer day, Ethan returned from America. The welcome party was grand and glittering, with hundreds of eyes on him. The heir had come home. Celeste stood quietly in a corner, pale blue dress, hands clasped. She didn't know why her heart pounded so loudly. Maybe it was because his gaze had brushed over her in the crowd. Maybe it was something she hadn't dared to admit for years. He was her husband, even if he had never once called her wife. And for the first time in 6 years, their eyes met, not through the haze of childhood, but as two grown individuals. No one noticed it. But in that moment, thin, invisible threads began to move again. Threads named the past that never had a name. In the days that followed, something intangible settled over the Lancaster estate, unspoken yet unmistakably felt. The air seemed warmed, as though gently reheated over an old hearth. Not quite blazing, but laced with the faint scent of smoke from the past. Ethan had returned mature, composed, carrying the quiet poise of a man forged in the heart of the financial capital. But what made people cautious wasn't the diplomas he brought back. It was the way he looked at Celeste during breakfast in front of the entire family. No longer with detached curiosity, no longer with surprise at their reunion, but with a steady presence, as if in the once incomplete picture of his life, he had found a piece he hadn't known was missing. And Miranda Lancaster noticed. She knew that if Ethan kept looking at Celeste that way, everything she had built, every plan meticulously designed for her son's future, could collapse. The chairmanship of the corporation could not be tied to a girl who once belonged to the servant class. So she began to act. One morning, sunlight streaming into the grand dining room, Miranda placed her teacup down gently and spoke with a tone as light as a breeze, yet enough to silence the entire table. Ethan, I've been thinking. Now that you're home, it's time to consider your future. The Turner family has expressed interest in uniting our families. Olivia, their daughter, is beautiful, well-educated, and quite accomplished. What are your thoughts? Celeste sat quietly at the end of the table, back straight, stirring her milk with a spoon. But inside, it felt like someone had wrapped a fist around her lungs. Then a voice rang out clear and firm. Mother, I already have a wife. The room froze. Every sound drained out as if the air itself recoiled. Miranda turned sharply, eyes cold as ice. What did you just say? Ethan looked her straight in the eye. No hesitation. The woman I married is Celeste Moore. Even if I wasn't aware at the time the ceremony happened, I can't deny it, and I don't want to deny it. Celeste looked up, stunned. Not because of what he said, but because of one word he had chosen so deliberately, don't want to. Miranda's hands clenched into tight fists, her face pale, but she couldn't say anything more, only managed to choke out one sentence. We'll talk about this later. That breakfast didn't end with pleasantries. It ended in silence. A silence that warned of an approaching storm, and the first to feel its full weight was Celeste. That afternoon, the sky seemed to sense it too. The sun dimmed, the wind lost its gentleness. In the Lancaster estate, every footstep echoed longer than usual, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Celeste sat alone in her room in the West Wing, the room she had lived in for 6 quiet years. Not quite a servant's quarters, not truly a lady's chamber, just a space for a girl whose name had never been spoken in full. 2 knocks on the door, then it opened without waiting for permission. Miranda Lancaster entered, no shouting, no storm of fury. But each step she took landed like a weight on Celeste's chest, making the girl instinctively stand and bow, "Ma'am." Miranda didn't sit. She merely stood, hands loosely clasped in front of her dress eyes, glancing around the modest room, neat but nowhere near the opulence of the rest of the estate. 6 years. You and your mother lived here. You weren't mistreated, were you? Her voice was gentle, almost grateful, but carried the sharp edge of authority. Celeste nodded, her voice trembling. No, ma'am. My mother and I, we've always been grateful for your kindness. Miranda's gaze locked onto her eyes trying so hard to stay calm. I owe your mother a debt, yes, for agreeing to the ceremony back then, but you must understand something, Celeste. That ritual, it was symbolic. Ethan needs a wife who can walk beside him, not a servant's daughter. Celeste's heart sank, not because the words were cruel, but because, somewhere deep down, she had once believed the same. Miranda stepped closer, placing a folder onto the small wooden table by the window. Her movements remained graceful, composed, but her words were sharp as knives. The Turner family is a strategic partner. This marriage isn't just personal, it's positional. I cannot allow someone like you to hold my son back. Celeste clenched her hands together. Her fingers were ice cold. But I'm not heartless, Miranda continued. You may remain here quietly as a minor wife. In return, I'll purchase a house for your mother outside the city. She won't have to work anymore, and you can pretend this marriage never existed in the Lancaster records. Her tone was still soft, but her eyes unyielding. Celeste stood in silence for a long time, like a child searching for her voice in a room without echoes. Finally, she lifted her head. Her eyes no longer held the wide-eyed innocence of childhood, only quiet courage and a trace of sorrow. I understand, ma'am. I won't get in the way of Ethan's future. Miranda smiled a fleeting smile as if acknowledging a well-trained reply. She turned and left the room, her heels tapping a steady rhythm on the stone floor. No further words. No thank you. The door closed, and Celeste stood there for a long time, so long that she didn't even notice when the tears began to fall. The next morning, golden light spilled through the towering windows of the Lancaster dining hall. The long table was set more elegantly than usual, crystal glasses, gleaming napkins folded into swans, silverware polished to perfection. Celeste sat at the far end, quiet as a dry leaf tucked beneath an old tree. She wore a muted beige dress, held a glass of milk gently, and kept her eyes down, trying to keep her heart from trembling. Across the table, Ethan had already arrived. White shirt, black tie hair, neatly parted, he carried the poise of a man ready to take over a legacy. But from the moment he stepped into the room, his eyes never left her. At the head of the table, Miranda spoke first, her voice light, as if this were no more than another family meeting. Ethan, I know you've just returned, but I think it's time you start thinking about responsibility. The Turner family has formally expressed their interest. Olivia is a good girl, intelligent, well-educated, refined. I believe you and she would make an excellent match. Celeste heard every word, but her heart wasn't filled with jealousy, just a coldness spreading from her chest to her fingertips. She had always known this moment would come, and she had prepared for her silence. But the silence was broken not by Miranda, not by the awkward air, by Ethan. He gently set his teacup down. His voice was calm, clear, but carried the warmth that was uniquely his. Mother, I know you want what's best for me, but I already have a wife." The spoon slipped from Celeste's hand and hit her porcelain saucer with a soft cling, a small sound, but loud enough to draw every eye to her. Miranda froze. She turned to Ethan, her eyes sharp with disbelief. "What did you say? Don't tell me you actually consider that ceremony from years ago." Real, Ethan nodded, firm, unwavering. "I'm not joking, Mother. Even though I had no knowledge of it back then, the ceremony was conducted. Celeste is my wife, in name, and in my heart." Celeste felt as though someone had pulled her to her feet with invisible strings. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes filled with 100 unspoken questions. Miranda, stunned, struggled to compose herself, but she was a woman of calculation, her lips sealed like a gavel striking wood. "Very well. We'll speak of this later." She rose from the table, her heels echoing down the marble floor. No one stopped her, because everyone could sense the tide had begun to shift, and standing at the very center of it was Celeste. That morning, the sound of a spoon falling in the Lancaster dining room felt like a premonition. For the first time in 6 years, a truth had been spoken aloud, and no one could push it back into the shadows anymore. That afternoon, pale gray clouds drifted across the Lancaster sky. No rain fell, but the sunlight had lost its warmth from the morning. In the small room of the West Wing, Celeste sat silently at the edge of her bed. Her hands rested on her knees. Her eyes stared out the window, searching for an answer she wasn't even sure she wanted to hear. A soft knock, even deliberate. She knew who it was. "Come in." "Ma'am." The door opened. Miranda Lancaster stepped inside, no longer carrying the courteous composure of a dignified hostess. Her face was cold. Her eyes barely hid the storm behind them. There were no pleasantries, no feigned warmth. Her words came out like arrows, sharp and direct. "You've done well, Celeste. Using a moment like that to manipulate my son?" Celeste, startled, rising quickly, her voice trembling. "No, that's not what happened, ma'am. I don't know why Ethan said that. I never." Miranda took a step forward, eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce through every guarded corner of Celeste's heart. "Do you think I'm that easily deceived? Do you really believe a single sentence in front of others can change your place in this house?" Celeste didn't know how to respond. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the ache of humiliation, of being spoken to as if she were dirt underfoot. Miranda held her gaze for a long moment, then exhaled, her voice low but ironclad. "I won't let this derail what I've built. You'd best remember your place, and behave accordingly." She turned without another word and left, leaving behind a silence that choked the very walls. Celeste stood, frozen, her body trembling faintly. She couldn't remember when the tears started, perhaps at the moment of accusation, or perhaps long before, when she first saw the disappointment in Miranda's eyes, even though no one had ever expected anything from her. That evening, beneath a sky that felt heavier than usual, Celeste made a decision. She had to speak with Ethan, not to beg for anything, but to ask for an answer. That evening, Celeste walked down the quiet hallway toward the study, the place Ethan often retreated to. The door, as always, was slightly ajar, a habit he never quite abandoned. When she stepped inside, he was seated in a velvet armchair, a thick book resting on his lap. Seeing her, he smiled and gently closed the book. "You were looking for me." Celeste stopped in her tracks. She hadn't expected that gentle smile, that warmth, and somehow it hurt more than any accusation. Why did you say those things to your mother in front of everyone? We were never truly married." Ethan looked at her. He wasn't smiling anymore, but neither was his gaze cold. It was sincere, steady, and full of something she hadn't seen before: clarity. "Celeste, I had no idea what happened back then. But when I woke up, when I saw you beside my bed, when I saw you stay through all those silent years, I began to understand." He stood and stepped closer, voice low, unwavering. "You gave up your childhood. You lived in the shadows because of a marriage I couldn't even remember. And I can't pretend it never happened. I won't." Celeste felt like her breath had been stolen. He wasn't shouting. His words weren't dramatic or poetic, but they were everything she had silently longed for: recognition, dignity, and yet that very fact terrified her. "But what about your mother?" Ethan paused, then answered softly, "I'll deal with my mother. But you've never been allowed to live according to your potential, Celeste. It's time you had the chance to dream, to build your own future." She looked up, eyes wide. I can go to college." Ethan smiled, a smile like sunlight after days of rain. "Of course, you deserve that and more. I'll take care of everything." And in that moment, for the first time in 6 years of living like a shadow, Celeste Moore began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than the maid's daughter, more than a wife by name. She began to believe in herself, and in something she'd never dared to name hope. November in Lancaster grew cold quickly. The leaves in the estate garden had turned the color of aged bronze, falling like whispers as the season quietly shifted. Celeste Moore sat by the window of her familiar little room, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Everything was changing so fast, she couldn't yet name it. Yesterday, she was a girl unlisted in the Lancaster family registry. Today, she was at least to Ethan the acknowledged wife. But that recognition, it felt like sunlight on a frozen lake. Warm, but not enough to melt the ice entirely. Especially when she saw the look in Miranda's eyes during the weekend dinner, no longer furious, but quieter, heavier, like a plan taking shape beneath still waters. And sure enough, 3 days later, Miranda summoned her, not to the West Wing, but to the main drawing room where the chandeliers cast crystalline shadows across the ornate tiled floor. Miranda was already seated, teacup in hand, as poised as ever, her expression calm like a hostess receiving a well-mannered guest, not the daughter-in-law she once disavowed. "Celeste, please, sit." Celeste bowed slightly, taking the edge of the chair across from her, hands folded in her lap. She knew no conversation with Miranda ever lacked intention. Miranda placed her cup down and slowly turned the handle, as though weighing every word. "You've been here for many years. I've never treated you or your mother unfairly. But now, for everyone's sake, I believe it's time you studied abroad." Celeste's breath caught just slightly. Miranda met her gaze firm, but not unkind. "This is your chance, Celeste. A way to build your future, and a way to leave this house with dignity. If you stay, you'll only make things harder for Ethan. I won't allow my son to sacrifice his future for sentiment." The words weren't cruel, but each one landed like a stone on still water, disturbing things Celeste thought she'd already buried. And she understood. She understood that to Miranda, she would never be enough. And worse, she understood something more painful than rejection. Ethan was now in a game where he never got to choose the pieces. That night, Celeste didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, the lamp casting soft light on her thoughtful face, her eyes deep in quiet calculation. Ethan had given her the chance to go to college, to leave the shadows of the West Wing. He had stood before everyone and said, "This is my wife." And in return, he now stood against the weight of family, of expectation, of business alliances that didn't forgive. She would not become his burden. The next morning, while Ethan was reading in the study, Celeste knocked and entered. She wore a deep blue dress, simple but elegant, and in her eyes was a look Ethan had never seen before, quiet strength, but unmistakable sadness. "Ethan, I want to study abroad." Ethan looked up surprised. What did you say?" "I've thought about it carefully. It's been my dream, and I think it's time for me to grow, to build a future I can truly call my own." She hesitated for a breath, then added softly, "I haven't told your mother. I don't want this to become another battle between you and her." Ethan said nothing. He looked at her, this girl who had once lived like a ghost in his family's home. And now she was the one choosing to walk away, not out of weakness, but because she wanted to protect what little dignity they still had. His lips pressed together. His eyes dimmed, but he didn't stop her. "If that's truly what you want, then I'll respect it. But you must promise me something, Celeste." She looked up. He stepped closer, gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze warm like a summer afternoon. "Wherever you go, you must remember, I'll always want to be beside you." Celeste didn't reply. She only nodded, then turned away. In her handbag, the plane ticket Miranda had given her the night before was already packed. But in her heart, the journey had only just begun. The Lancaster International Airport was cloaked in a fine morning mist, like threads of silver caught between glass and sky. Jets roared to life, climbing into the clouds, their engines thundering through the silence like unsaid goodbyes. Celeste Moore stood in the departure hall, wrapped in a long coat that hugged her slender frame. Her dark hair fell softly around her face, fluttering with the cold wind drifting through the terminal's tall glass doors. Beside her stood Ethan, not the heir of a vast fortune, not the future chairman of a powerful board, just a man. Quiet, still, standing beside the woman he couldn't hold on to. They hadn't spoken during the entire ride to the airport, but what needed to be said had already passed between their eyes. Ethan exhaled gently, his voice low. "Call me when you land. Whatever happens, Celeste, don't carry it alone." She smiled, not bitter, not forced, just quiet. "I'll be okay. I want to grow stronger, so that one day I can stand beside you without needing protection." There was no embrace, no tears, just a farewell that everyone understood wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another chapter. The departure gate opened. Celeste turned back once. Ethan was still there, watching her like a lighthouse that never extinguished its flame. 1 minute later, images of the two, the young corporate heir and the girl in the gray coat, flooded social media and news feeds under a single headline: Ethan Lancaster sees wife off to study abroad. 6-year secret marriage confirmed. The city reeled. The Turner family, offended by the public cancellation of their proposed engagement, immediately terminated their partnership with the Lancasters. Miranda nearly fainted when she saw the headlines, but Ethan didn't flinch. He stepped in front of the press, stood tall, and said calmly, "She is my wife, and I have nothing to hide." While reporters scrambled to piece together the modern-day Cinderella tale, Ethan delivered a marketing twist no one saw coming. He launched a new campaign for Lancaster's luxury perfume line titled "Grace in Simplicity, Power in Stillness," a tribute to authenticity and quiet strength. The product became an overnight sensation. Orders poured in by the hundreds of thousands. The Lancaster empire didn't just survive the media storm, it soared. All because of one decision: he didn't hide Celeste Moore. He claimed her. In another corner of the world, Celeste held her phone in both hands, reading the flood of news spreading across the internet. Her heart swelled with emotions, disbelief, gratitude, and a quiet relief that had no name. He had defended her, even with an ocean between them. She gently swiped her screen and whispered, "Thank you." From that day forward, Celeste changed. She began joining academic projects, worked part-time in a research lab, and studied relentlessly, as if trying to reclaim the childhood she had lost in silence. 2 years passed in what felt like a blink. Celeste Moore, the girl who once only dreamed of becoming an office assistant, now stood at the edge of something new: competence, independence, and a growing faith in herself. But one thing still remained, a flickering ember that never went out. A question, a forgotten name, an origin never fully understood. She knew she had once been a fate-matched bride. But what about her birth parents? What was her true past? And why did Miranda always flinch at the name Whitmore? One winter evening, while reviewing her notes by the dorm window, Celeste reopened her laptop and typed Gregory Whitmore, Whitmore Corporation history, collapse, Samuel Lancaster, 1999, stock transfer. And with that keystroke, the dust on old truths began to stir. The final pieces of a shredded puzzle started to reappear. Celeste Moore was no longer just searching for her identity. She was ready to confront the reason why an entire family once chose to forget her. Winter mornings in Boston had a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. Snowflakes gathered softly along the library window, ledges reflecting sunlight like scattered shards of glass. Celeste Moore sat in silence between rows of old books, her laptop open before her, a hand-drawn chart glowing on the screen, a shareholder map she had recreated piece by piece. And there it was, Gregory Whitmore, not as a failed businessman, but as the original founder of Whitmore & Sons, a corporation that once stood shoulder to shoulder with Lancaster Group in the early 20th century. She had spent 3 weeks digging through dusty archives, reading old financial reports, combing through documents erased from the internet, until she found a brief line in a 1999 asset transfer file: all personal assets of Gregory Whitmore to be preserved for minor daughter name withheld. Celeste froze. That sentence pierced through a memory she had buried long ago. Vague dreams of a white fenced home, of a woman with dark hair who held her tight before storms rolled in and of a chaotic afternoon, being pulled into a car while someone screamed, "Don't leave the girl, she's the heir." No, they weren't dreams. She had always assumed she was the housekeeper's daughter, but no one had ever confirmed it, not even Miranda. And now she realized Miranda never looked at her with disdain. It was something else entirely. Fear. Celeste made her decision that night. She booked a flight home. No warning, no text, no farewell email. She returned not as Ethan's wife, not as the servant's girl, but as Celeste Moore, a woman now chasing the truth of who she really was. The Lancaster estate looked unchanged, arched windows, wrought iron gates, and the scent of lavender mingling with fallen leaves. She walked down the wooden hallway of her childhood, stopping in front of the storage room she'd once been forbidden to enter. This time, the door was unlocked. Inside, file boxes, photo albums, family trees, and several crates marked with hand-scrawled initials, GW. She opened one. Her hands trembled. Inside were letters, messy handwriting from a father to his lost daughter, my little girl Celestina. "One day you'll understand why I couldn't stay with you." Her chest tightened. Celestina. A name she had never heard yet. It rang like something ancient and sacred, as if her entire soul had been waiting to hear it spoken. She read on. A final unsent letter, this one signed, Isabel Whitmore. "She can't stay here. If Gregory falls, Samuel will never spare her. I've arranged for her to be taken to my mother's old maid. They'll raise her like their own. Don't tell anyone. She'll carry the Moore name. And one day, she'll return to the world not as a shadow, but as herself." Celeste couldn't keep reading. She collapsed onto the floor, hands pressed over her heart, trying to hold it together. She was never a maid's daughter. She was Celestina Whitmore, the last rightful heir to a name buried by power and now finally uncovered. Downstairs in the drawing room, Ethan stood quietly by the window, as if sensing a shift in the air. He didn't know why the sky today felt exactly like the afternoon Celeste had left 2 years ago. But he knew this much. Some people, no matter how far they go, always come back, not to hold on, but to stand tall under their true name. And Celeste Moore, now Celestina Whitmore, was about to step out from the very last shadow. The rooftop of the Lancaster estate at sunset had always held a strange, almost otherworldly peace. From there, one could see the sloping hills in the distance, bathed in the golden light of late autumn, like honey spilled across a pine forest's edge. Celeste stood quietly, a thin shawl catching the breeze, her gaze steady on the horizon, her eyes no longer innocent, but full of something harder-won clarity. After everything she had uncovered, there was no going back to the girl she had once been. But moving forward meant facing a system that had once erased her entirely. She knew the name Whitmore was no longer found in legal ledgers, but it lived in every forgotten contract and whispered rumors of a founder betrayed, and now in every cell of her body. The door opened behind her. Ethan stepped out. He didn't announce himself. He wasn't the heir or the chairman, now just the man who had once stood in the snow watching her plane disappear. They looked at each other in a silence both unfamiliar and deeply known. "You know now?" Celeste asked softly. Her voice carried like wind. "My mother told me," Ethan replied, later than she should have. "They tried to bury it, Celeste. Because if you're Celestina, everything changes." Celeste gave a small smile. Not bitter, just aware. "I don't even know what I would have preferred. To know the truth earlier and face the pain, or never know and live peacefully in a lie." Ethan stepped closer. His voice was calm. "No matter who you are, what name you carry, what family you belong to me, you've always been the one who gave my life meaning." There was a pause. The wind caught the last of the evening light in her eyes. "I didn't come back for inheritance," she said. "I came back to understand why they feared a child like me so much. And if I can use this truth, this name, to do something right, then I will." Ethan nodded. He didn't try to stop her. "And if you ever need me, not to protect, but to walk beside, I'm still here, like I was that first day." For the first time in years, Celeste felt seen, heard, not for who she was said to be, but for the choices she now had the strength to make. Just a few days later, quiet news began circulating within the finance world. Celestina Whitmore, the last legal heir of the Whitmore legacy, had formally submitted documents to reinstate the company, not as a financial empire, but as a new kind of foundation, an education and technology model for social good. The name high society once tried to erase had now returned, not seeking power, not asking for pity, but standing tall as a symbol of a new generation, one that didn't wait for permission, one that didn't need applause, one that proved itself through knowledge and dignity. In a private corner of the Lancaster estate, Miranda Lancaster read the headlines in silence. Her hands trembled slightly on the teacup's handle. She knew the chessboard she had once controlled completely was no longer hers, and the one now making the next move was a girl she could no longer predict. She didn't know whether to be afraid or quietly begrudgingly proud. Back in Boston, in a modest office filled with books and scattered sunlight, Celeste sat at her desk, fingers poised over her keyboard. At the top of the screen, the Whitmore Foundation charter draft. She typed the first line with calm, unshakable certainty. We do not build from the past. We rebuild from the silence that was once forced upon us. A small flame had been lit, not for grandeur, not for vengeance, but because the world needed it, and because someone somewhere had to light the match. And this time, it was her. January in Boston was draped in a quiet layer of snow, as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. On the 14th floor of a restored heritage building, soft yellow light spilled over hand-sketched blueprints, financial charts, and an old plastic laminated photo, a 3-year-old girl standing beside a kind-eyed man. On the back, faded handwriting read, "My daughter, Celestina." Celeste sat by the window, fingers interlaced, gaze not on the snow, but on the invisible paths fate had drawn for her. In the past 6 months, she had slowly begun rebuilding the Whitmore name, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a platform of transparency, innovation, and hope. The Foundation's first project, Lumina, was now being piloted in 3 states, a fully funded scholarship platform for children who had lost parents due to financial collapse. She didn't use the Lancaster name. She didn't speak at talk shows. She wasn't paraded around in PR campaigns. She was simply Celeste Moore, founder of the Whitmore Project, a name once scrubbed from history, now quietly re-emerging, not as a legend, but as a light. That night, a small, unmarked package arrived. Inside, a weathered leather-bound notebook, corners softened by time, and a folded letter. If you're reading this, it means I could no longer hide it. Your father didn't fall on his own. He was betrayed, silenced, and you were the reason they forced him into it. I'm sorry for the darkness, but now you have your own light. Walk forward with it. Isabel. She clutched the notebook to her chest. The questions that had once haunted her no longer felt like knives. They were doors, and she was ready to open every one of them. On one marked page, she found a red underlined day. Gregory was forced to sign over shares, Chairman President Samuel Lancaster. She didn't flinch. Somewhere deep down she had known. And maybe Ethan did too, but he had never said anything. Not out of deceit, but because some truths you have to find yourself to fully become who you were meant to be. She closed the notebook. The lamplight glowed against her cheekbones, her eyes calm as a midnight lake. She wouldn't seek revenge, but she would never forget. She was no longer the maid's daughter, no longer the shadow wife of a corporate heir. She was Celestina Whitmore, the girl who rose from ash and silence, who turned memory into power, and rebuilt a world where no one would ever have to go unheard again. In a university hall where she once sat quietly, a new poster now hung, "Meet Celeste Moore, founder of the Whitmore Project, a story of silence, resilience, and rebirth." Her photo wasn't glamorous, no makeup, no filters, just a pair of eyes clear, unafraid. A student had scrawled beneath it with a black marker. She didn't reclaim her name to wear a crown. She reclaimed it to light the way. That evening, she stepped onto the small rooftop of her Boston apartment. Ethan stood there waiting. No suits, no titles, just the scarf she had knit him 2 winters ago. "You spoke beautifully," he said. "No ceremony, no tension. I didn't think you'd come." "My mother's gone," he said simply. Silence. She looked down at her shoes, plain white sneakers, not heels of a Lancaster wife, not the scuffed flats of a housemaid, just shoes for walking forward. Ethan continued. She left behind a will, part of her estate, to establish a scholarship fund. In Isabel Whitmore's name, she requested you lead it. Celeste looked up. Something flickered in her eyes, not tears, but the kind of emotion that only surfaces when old cycles finally begin to close. She always knew who I was, she said, but thought removing my name would remove my place. Ethan handed her a small box. You don't have to accept the fund, or the name, but if you take this, I'll wait, however long it takes. She opened the box, a slim, unpolished ring. Inside, one word engraved home. That night, she sat quietly on the rooftop, his arm around her shoulder, a mug of cocoa in her hands. They didn't speak, because now silence was no longer a void to fill. It was the place where their hearts could finally rest. Below in the learning center of the Lumina project, a little girl named Miko laughed. She was the first child ever accepted. Her mother, a single nurse who had died of overwork, had once written a letter of thanks in a rainstorm. My daughter wants to grow up and be a light, like Miss Celeste. That sentence was now embroidered on the classroom wall beneath a drawing, not of Celeste on a stage, but sitting in a circle of children, listening, truly listening. Ethan gently squeezed her hand. You did it, Celestina. She tilted her head. No, we did it. If you hadn't stepped down those Lancaster stairs that day, if you hadn't looked at me without judgment, I would never have had the courage to cross the line I was told not to exist beyond. He smiled. And if you hadn't walked away, I would never have learned how to love without needing to keep. A breeze passed through, soft like a lullaby. That night, she wrote in her journal, a habit she had kept since age 13. Some names were once crossed out, some loves never spoken. But when we dare to look into that silence, we realize they were never gone, just waiting for us to grow strong enough to speak them. I don't need to be anyone's wife to be whole. I only want to be Celestina, the woman who walks beside you kind, even when the world isn't, and certain that some stories don't need permission to begin. And when the door finally closed behind her and the wind whispered past the balcony, you understood. Sometimes justice doesn't come in applause, not through courts, not in headlines. It comes when someone once denied a name finally speaks it for herself, without permission, without fear, without needing to prove anything. Just this, I am still here, and I was never gone. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. If something in your heart stirred, if a quiet truth just woke up inside, you leave a comment below. No matter where you are or what time it is, may you too be called by your true name. By you and no one else. Good night. We'll meet again in tomorrow's story.